Welcome back. This is my monthly live stream. It's very good once again to see you all. So, welcome. Now, this is my last live stream before I return to the corporate world next week. I have a ton of interviews that I've kind of tried to cram in. So, I'm in the process of editing 6 more episodes. I just finished editing the 7th, which was the Avi Loeb. So just kind of just going through channel news right now. But I just finished editing the Avi Loeb interview. It's locked in the chamber and ready to release on Monday, July 8th. And that one's a good one. That one is a banger. And, so I didn't do a ton of, I didn't do any prep on thumbnails and things like that because I'm still working through a bunch of these episodes. But uh, that's a banger because there's a lot of stuff and if you go to Twitter right now, I put a 6-minute clip out that really cuts to the heart of that interview. There's a lot of information about the potential for non-human life in the universe, or at least sentient life somewhere else outside the solar system, that is literally right under our noses. And when you are a prominent academic like Avi Loeb, you can't come right out and say certain things. Otherwise, people will attack you. As an example, he wrote an entire paper covering a natural explanation for some of the elements that he found in he did like used kind of like a magnetic sled, kind of drug it across the bottom of the ocean about a mile down, just to the north of Papua New Guinea. And the reason he did that, he was using neodymium magnets and things like that. And the reason he did that is there was an extrasolar object, something that came from outside the solar system, that smashed into the Earth's atmosphere and kind of burned up about 20 kilometers before it hit the surface, which meant it was composed of material that was much stronger than if you take, for instance, a more recent meteorite that hit the Earth. It, similar size, similar velocity coming in, at least relative to the Earth. And it broke up and disintegrated about 70 kilometers before it hit the Earth. And that just meant that the elements composing it were much weaker, right? Or, much more prone to burn up in the atmosphere. So when I interviewed him, I kind of asked him questions specifically about his paper, because there are some charts in there that are just literally right in front of your face. And what the charts show is they're on a logarithmic scale. So for folks who, this is a little bit hard to describe, but everything is to like a power of 10. Basically, it's not exponential, but it's kind of similar concept. So you can fit in elements that are in the sample that are 1,000 times more prevalent than they should be. And when I said they should be, there's a certain concentration of elements that you find anywhere in the solar system, because the primordial elements that formed our solar system are all very similar. So what he did in this chart is he graphed these elements along an axis, and things that are similar to our solar system are along an axis of one, are hovering around 1. Okay. But there are elements that are 1,000 times more prevalent. And just to give you a sense of that, and you can watch, again, I encourage you to watch this video that's floating around Twitter right now. I just uploaded it today. There are elements like thorium, uranium, lithium, and beryllium, as an example, that are, some of which are 1,000 times more prevalent in the sample than you would typically find in the Earth's soil, right? Or in the Earth's crust, or a sample from the sun, etc. And the reason those elements that I just told you about, particularly beryllium and uranium are the ones that are like 1,000 times more prevalent. Well, beryllium is used as a neutron moderator in fusion reactors. Lithium 6 deuteride is used as a fuel in nuclear reactors. Thorium, as well as uranium, are also used as nuclear fuels. Then there's a whole other section of elements that are in that sample that are like niobium and tungsten and zirconium that are typically present in or used to strengthen metal alloys. Now, tungsten's used as like a heating element to kind of keep some of the elements in high pressure environments, cool. So as I looked at this, I just kind of just started going through left to right and examining these elements and looking for what applications they were typically used in. And there were a few that had many different uses, like barium has many different uses. And there's another element, but most of the other elements fell into two pretty distinct categories. The first was in fusion reactors or fusion bombs, and the second was in spacecraft construction. At least we would use these elements for spacecraft construction. So I then kind of step back. I'm like, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm nuts. So I just put a query into ChatGPT and I said something to the effect of, if there was an object that crashed into the ocean from space that had the following 27 elements, and these are the elements that were, greater than 100 times the prevalence in our solar system, what would it most likely be? First hit, spacecraft and or satellite. The second hit was nuclear reactor and or nuclear powered spacecraft. The third, it was it said, ChatGPT said less likely. It was something like anomalous or extraterrestrial object, i.e. asteroid. Okay. But what's interesting about that is it's right in front of your face. You just have, in terms of this paper, it's just right there. And all you have to do is take that initial leap of faith and kind of see what it implies. The other thing that's very important about this paper is that Avi Loeb's team tracked this object coming from outside the solar system. And then they reached out to Space Command, and Space Command verified it with, and that is kind of Department of Defense with all their fancy, $1 trillion equipment, et cetera, that confirmed with 99.999% probability that it came from outside the solar system based on their instruments and things like that. So you have an extrasolar object that has a high concentration of elements that on Earth we only use, well, not only, but are most likely used for spacecraft and fusion power. Okay, so of course, Dr. Loeb, being a very conservative professor at one of the top academic institutions in the world, he was the head of the astronomy department there, which is a very prestigious post. He held that post for the longest possible tenure in Harvard's history. He also was, back in the day, he was the first foreigner to run a project for the Strategic Defense Initiative. If you remember from the Reagan years, that was Star Wars, etc. So the guy is, knows, from my assessment, knows a lot more than he can say. Because when I started reading off the uses of this thing, he smiled because he knew exactly where I was going. He knew. But he can't come out and say it. He has to be very conservative. So he wrote an entire paper on how these could be naturally occurring elements from some other planetary composition. So he wrote like a 46-page paper or something like that on some like magma planet or something like that could conceivably have this. And then in another paper, he just has one sentence that said it could have an artificial origin, and he just that's it. He said it could, may, not putting the sat on it, and he was mercilessly, ruthlessly attacked. He had people saying that it was a truck. He found a truck out off the coast. I don't know about you, but I've never heard of a truck that has uranium at 1,000 times the concentration it would be in Earth. Like, whoever wrote that paper is a moron. It's just a moron. Like, I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. Either is a moron or is willfully trying to make Dr. Loeb look bad. Then somebody else said it was fly ash. So a lot of this stuff in academia, they throw this garbage at you, but you have to waste resources to debunk these absurd, half-baked theories in order to kind of maintain your academic stature. So there's a lot of that going on. But the bottom line is, it's highly likely that the thing was an artificial object. It could be space trash. It could be, and not from our current modern human civilization, unless there's some super secret program that we have that we sent something out to space and then circled it back. I doubt it. I doubt it. So very high probability that it's, and that's the thing. All this stuff is out there, but you just have to ask the right questions. And afterward, I think he was pretty happy with the interview. Like, because he can't say the things that I said in the interview. He just can't, because he'd get attacked for it. But when somebody like me just comes in and, with all shucks, I'm just an idiot. What's niobium doing in this, and what's lanthanide and all, lanthium and all these kind of strange elements. But I highly encourage you to read his paper on the magnetic sled expedition that he did to Papua New Guinea. You can just do a quick Google search. It'll take you to the Galileo Project website, and you can just go through it. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of nice finds out there that if you just do your homework, you can find it. Let's see. Yeah, this was the explosion that they observed was a fraction of the energy expended by the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, it wasn't a tiny meteorite. It was a meteorite it was definitely, it was debris of something that fell to the earth and definitely came from outside the solar system. That's the key thing. And I think he's observed about 3 separate objects. The first being a Muamua, the second being this one, and then there's a third one that I can't recall off the top of my head. So it wasn't, they're not dump. It wasn't like nuclear waste dump stuff, because there would be you would find other things. You would find plutonium, for instance, right? And other sorts of things that they didn't find any plutonium in there. You'd find more lead, right? If they dumped radioactive waste, it didn't have the chance to burn up in the atmosphere like lead might. So yeah, it's not. It's definitely not that. So somebody said it was a truck, which is obscene. It was ridiculous. Another person said it was fly ash, and then there was a pretty good analysis that Loeb did that showed it clearly wasn't fly ash. So, how you doing, Woo Rider DG? Yeah, by the way, it's a little early, but happy 4th of July. Even though our freedom is steadily being taken away, we still sort of have it. So, keep saying what's on your mind. Don't censor yourself, unless you have to talk about certain topics. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk to you if I continued going down a line that the data suggests. So sometimes you have to deliberately not believe your lying eyes. But we all know what that is. Yeah, fact checkers. Yeah, you gotta figure stuff out on your own. You can't just take things that people tell you, and that's why it's so hard. That's a good that's a great question, because who do you trust? Right? Like the clowns currently in power have lied to us about literally everything. So I don't know. I don't know how you would tell. And it's also like the non-human intelligences who get to you first are the ones who are going to influence you first. So, and you're going to hear different narratives because they lie too. So, yeah, he's pretty coy, but you could tell from his body language that he liked where I was going. He definitely liked where I was going. But the other explanation, Roger, that he wrote an entire paper on, I didn't follow it, but it's the magma explanation. So like an object or like a meteor or an asteroid would have been ejected from like a magma like planet where all these, highly specific elements could have been just floating in that energetic environment and blasted out into space and then reached our solar system. So there is a natural explanation, and he spent a lot of time with it. So, I'm not saying it's 100%, but like there's a pretty good there's a pretty good probability that it's not made by human hands, but is an object that was made by sentient intelligences of some sort. Yeah, like just sit down, negotiate a peace. This stuff is insane. It's nuts. And we're just like blowing billions of dollars. You're talking about alien versus alien kind of conflict or something like that. But yeah, when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, it's just we're really not we're spending our money, we're debasing our currency, and over time Russia just has, it's like our own historical civil war, right? Like the South had better generals. They were, much more skilled fighters, but the North just had a greater industrial base and could just had more soldiers that they could throw at the South. So in the end, in a war of attrition, the bigger side is always going to win. And that's, you know, if we don't kind of draw a line through some sort of settled agreement, Russia's just by weight of uh, population, industrial base. I mean, they have a 10-to-1 artillery advantage, as an example. So, and then it's just also the whole thing's hard to watch, right? You have like these cowards 5 to 10 kilometers behind friendly lines eating Skittles and drinking Mountain Dew while they're like droning guys who are like trying to surrender to drones that can't defend themselves. And it's that's really hard to watch. Like that, I that doesn't look like war. Like that just looks like a slaughter to me, right? And it looks it just feels cowardly. It's just not. Uh, and they're just exploiting kind of they look like it looks a lot of them look like war crimes to me, to be honest. And I'm not picking any particular side. It's just some of the videos I've seen. They just look like war crimes. So um, let's just see. Yeah, I mean, they would have to be really evil to do that, and I don't think they can't be that evil. I think they just can't. Uh, because it also just wouldn't work, right? Like it's never happened. At least, yeah, it's never happened in U.S. history. So I don't think Americans would tolerate it, right? I know people are talking about this false flag and suspension of, um, the election in order to, because, and that's the other thing too. Like these elites are pushing us toward a war with Russia. Why? I mean, like, we weren't supposed to continue pushing east, right? Like the Minsk agreement basically said we wouldn't start to recruit all these Eastern European nations, and yet we did. We just violated it from the very beginning. And look, I don't think they're good guys, right? Like, but I also don't. It just feels like there's a string of really, really. I mean, look at sanctions, right? Like sanctions make sense only insofar as you use them to reinforce the international machinery that you've set up, right, as the United States. Anything that violates your own machinery undermines you in many ways. And the mistake that our government made was they went beyond those rules to the point where they were seizing private property solely because it was denominated in US dollars. Like that's insane. That goes against like John Locke with the rights of private property. Like what are we doing? I know like the oligarchs aren't great people, but you still have to have principles, and you should abide by those principles if you intend other countries to follow your lead in an international system that you for the most part created. But these fools, for a short-term caffeine hit, decided to start seizing things that were solely because they were denominated in US currency. So what happens? Well, we have this agreement with the Saudis, the security agreement that expired on June 9th, 2024, which was reported nowhere in the in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, which is highly suspicious. But in that original agreement, which lasted 50 years, the Saudis, who were the spare oil capacity for the world, right? They were like they could ramp or slow down in order to provide enough oil liquidity, let's just say, for the rest of the world. They, as part of that agreement for the US to provide them with a defense guarantee, they had to denominate all their oil barrels in dollars, right? Now, if you multiply the price of oil times the number of barrels and stuff like that, it's barely a rounding error on kind of what the national budget is, national debt, things like that. But if that's the case, when it is the case, there's still second, third, and fourth order effects of all that. If that were just the case, right, you would see articles in the Wall Street Journal just saying, yeah, it happened, but it's not a big deal. The fact that it was completely just silent, nothing to see here, move along, right? But what the practical implication of that is, if I don't need dollars to buy oil from the Saudis, there's less demand for dollars. And if there's less demand for dollars, I'm going to, I might buy the same oil in a different currency. And with less demand, what that does is that depreciates the value because there's less, it's supply and demand, right? So there's less demand. So when there's less demand, the cost goes down for that product, in which case is the dollar. And when you depreciate the currency, that results in inflation. So these fools basically, by passing all these infrastructure bills and things like that just flooded the system with dollars, right? And they're printing dollars and all that stuff. It's effectively a tax on the poor citizens of the country, right? And the tax is just in everything they buy. right? By deflating the currency or by inflating the currency, that's by default what happens. Now it's also a way for the Fed to kind of manage the debt, right? You can either explicitly increase taxes to pay it down, or you can inflate the currency. And inflate the currency, the average rank and file don't really, understand that they're effectively just paying higher taxes to manage the government's debt. So what's also happening is the elites who are running the country, who have their money in stocks, right? They're getting a great infusion, like the gravy train's still going, and they're doing fine. That's why you're seeing this decoupling between the stock market and ground reality. And anyway, it's really painful to watch. Let's see. Yeah, I don't want to speak for the Ukrainians. I mean, they're just running out of men. So are the Russians, but Russians have a 3-to-1 advantage in terms of population, and the melds the population. So thank you, loading Mike or loading Mick. I don't know if it's which one it is, but I'm just going to read it. Happy 4th to you, Americans. Here in Norway, we usually have an Amcar cruise through a small town outside of Oslo on July 4th with a lot of classic American cars. Thank you, loading Mick. Appreciate you. Yeah. So Roger Claiborne is saying they got away with too much. Now they think they can do anyone, and they are above all laws and norms. They're drunk on power, like all historic leaders got that had no accountability. Yeah, that's the rub. That's the rub right there. And it's just weak men and women create hard times. And in the last 10 to 30 years, depending on when you want to start, we had a lot of weak people who, in terms of like morals and institutional or intestinal fortitude and courage, like they don't have it, right? There's not a lot of people who've served who also end up in Congress or in elected positions. There's not a lot of competent people either who end up in those positions, because who would want to, right? The moment that you start a congressional campaign, right, you better have a war chest. You better be rich, because you're going to get sued. You're going to get lawfared to death. And this is like late Roman Republic kind of stuff. And then, like, I've gotten complaints about prior guests complaining about, immigration, but it's a disaster. There are millions of people who came here that they don't have any, that they can't even track. And the other thing, this is where it gets tricky, because this is something that some elites like, because what it does for them, if they own large businesses and things like that, it reduces the price of labor, because they can hire people at extremely low labor rates. So we're screwing poor Americans, right? Like the Democratic Party should be up in arms about this, but they're not. It's really weird, right? Because the poorest Americans, which tends to be the kind of people who need to be helped, is typically kind of a large demographic within the Democratic Party, and that's who they're supposed to be helping out. And they're kind of not. It's really weird. And I can't explain why. The only thing I can think of is just political malpractice, I would guess, because for the Democrats, they're worried about being called racist, right? It's like, it's probably that stupid from a political standpoint. And then the Republicans, they don't do anything to stop it because it makes the Democrats look bad. So it's just this whole dysfunctional, like, political garbage. So I don't know how this is all going to resolve, but again, you just have to take care of your family, treat your neighbors well, try not to fall into the tribalism, treat good people the way good people should be treated, and try to be as self-sufficient as you can, and we'll get through this. We'll get out of it. It'll be fine, right? There's just so much insanity right now of people just reacting to things in a hyperbolic, manner. Like we had 2 Supreme Court decisions, right? One, but like simultaneously, one weakened the power of the executive, the other one strengthened it, right? But there are people who are literally freaking out about both. It's just like, which is it, right? With Chevron, the Supreme Court weakened the power of the executive branch of government in the sense that folks like the EPA can't just write any old law that they want. Now, it was getting out of control with executive orders and things like that. So right now it's a good thing. I think if things moderate in about 5 years, it'll probably be a bad thing, right? Because these, some of these institutions won't be able to get anything done, particularly in a crisis. If a big crisis comes along in a particular area. So everything in American politics is all about balance and equilibrium. Well, same thing, like achieving that proper equilibrium. And right now it's way off whack. And Farah in 3D. Yes, that would be the shit show would be the technical term. Yes. Yes. But I'm trying to be as balanced as I can because there's certainly things that enrage me. And you've seen some of my rants before. I'm trying not to do that because you can find plenty of that on the internet. And I don't think it's a responsible thing to do. And that's the other thing too, is this podcast gets a lot bigger. I have to moderate my views a little bit in the sense that, there are people on both sides who watch this show and I appreciate you both. And, there's stuff that I am militantly against, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because I just don't want to alienate people. Right. It's like working in a corporation. You don't want to talk about politics at work. Now, some people love to talk about politics at work. Like those people are not good people, right? They don't help, right? Like all I care about when I work with people is, are they competent? Are they honest? Do they have integrity? And is their intent to do the right thing? That's it. That's it. I don't care what their views are on abortion. That's their problem, right? I don't care, right? I'm sure they have a good, and again, I'm deliberately not saying one side or the other, but it used to be common in this country in polite society not to talk about 2 topics, politics and religion. And it's gotten way out of whack. And to the point where people are like, you had this person on and they said this, you need to immediately denounce them. Fuck you. No, I don't do that. And you all know I've had people who have spouted off things on the right. I mean, look, I have 4 episodes coming up with Sarfati, so get ready. Okay? Dr. Sarfati. You buckle up, okay? But I also like Stefan Schwartz. He deadpan was talking about some, some left-wing stuff, right? And I didn't give him any static for it. Everybody believes things for what they believe to be good reason. Everybody is biased. Everybody is partisan in a certain way. The way our brains work is our emotions kind of dictate what we should think, and then our logic just kind of fills in the gaps. And that's just the way we are. So the best thing to do is just let those emotions flow or remove yourself from a situation, get a punching bag, let it out, and then come back and be rational, or at least attempt to be rational. And if somebody that you're interacting with, it's impossible for them to get irrational, just separate yourself from the situation. Okay, so I kept talking, and yeah, so I got that first one from Roger. Yeah, that's right. But eventually, no one makes enough money to buy their products. But then the government prints money to keep the big guys from reaping what they. Yeah, it's some scary stuff. Okay, we got that one. Yeah, and guys, I struggle. Look, I struggle with rage. Believe me. And you've seen like a tiny tiny segment. Like if you talk about the seven deadly sins, like wrath is my problem. And it's because I just see a lot of this stuff. Like people are being hypocrites and like not following the golden rule, treating others as they want to be treated. And it sets me off. People being dishonest, that really sets me off. Yep. Yeah, work is definitely not the place for it. But yeah, it's important to talk about politics. It's also important to talk about religion too. Um, but again, you have to be talking to people that you trust, right? Like I can't talk about politics, where I am because you say the wrong thing, people will literally assault you. So it's you just you gotta be super careful. Okay, yeah, I'm getting off on a all right. Paranormal experiences I had are fascinating. Heard from a guest. Okay, let me just get through the end and then yeah, all humans have biases. Period. So, well, I was talking about episodes, so we can get into paranormal experience, but I haven't had nothing to report recently. Like the strangest one I had thus far was that dream, right? The what's it called? The Jabril thing. But I'm sure you've all heard that, so I'm not going to repeat it. Pavlos, always a pleasure, my friend. I appreciate your kind words as always. So things that I've heard through the grapevine. Okay, and this is important. So allegedly, and you can see this by just watching the news, and you will have come to the same conclusion. You're going to say, "Duh." But I have it on good authority that there has been a deliberate effort to shut down disclosure. Okay, from whoever's running it, like those are the orders. Those are the orders that have come down. So why, who, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think somebody else said it was a Scheisse show. That's just German for the first word. I need to like cut down on the cursing. So um again, as this channel gets bigger, I have to be more responsible and more professional. But what was I saying? so um I think there's so much chaos right now. I mean, just recently, just south of Little Rock, like I was just in Arkansas because I drove basically across the country to get to Tennessee and back. I was in, Arkansas maybe a week ago, just driving through, right? I think I spent a night there. There was a General Dynamics plant that had an explosion, and there were, I think, um, two people dead, one person injured, or two missing, one person injured, something like that. And could it have been just a random industrial accident? Sure. Could it have been Russian sabotage? Here's another thing that's happened. Again, this isn't getting a lot of news. There was a retired major general in the Marine Corps. And NCIS is investigating this. So the Naval Criminal Investigation Service. I'm not entirely sure what NCIS stands for, but they do like criminal investigations and stuff like that. Is investigating it. He died at 29 Palms, and he was the former commander of 29 Palms. If you look at his background and just go through his career, he played a big part in Operation Inherent Resolve. Operation Inherent Resolve was an operation to utterly annihilate ISIS, basically. So, if you're, again, I'm not saying this is what happened, but I can spin a yarn. If you're the Russian GRU or FSB, SVR, and you want to create some chaos in the United States and kind of get some licks at the United States for causing a lot of Russian deaths, right? We're sending weapons that are killing a lot of Russians. You might exploit the wide open borders that we have to get someone who's, a surviving member of ISIS. Just give them some intel on where this guy is enjoying his nice and happy retirement, and you have motive, and you put yourself, you put someone between yourself and the problem. So I'm not saying that's what happened, but the fact that NCIS is investigating it is noteworthy. Okay. Again, I don't have any other information that we all know about the special forces colonel in North Carolina that found 2 Chechens outside his home, surveilling his children with telephoto lenses, etc. He shot one of them. That went down a media memory hole, right? Gone. You had several other ammunition fires over the last 2 years that were suspicious and all that stuff. So, but we're doing some really irresponsible things. So the last thing that happened is the president authorized, and he didn't. I mean, the office of the president authorized it, but I mean, it's pretty clear that Biden's mental faculties have rapidly deteriorated in the last 6 months. Just old age. I mean, to me, it seems, I kind of feel bad for the guy because he's put in this high profile position, but I don't think he's not really making the decisions. But the people who aren't doing a good job. Like, allowing the Ukrainians to use our weapons to strike within Russian territory was a bad move, and it already blew up in our faces, right? It may have, I don't know how this happened, but there were ATACMS munitions that had cluster bombs on them that I doubt we would have allowed the Ukrainians to deliberately target sunbathers in Sevastopol, right? Civilians. But I imagine there's a scenario where the Russian air defenses knocked one of these things off course, and it killed a bunch of people, a bunch of civilians enjoying a beach. The Russians responded by shooting down one of our global hawks over the Black Sea, which I think is an appropriate escalatory measure. But we keep also taking out their early warning radars, which again is like, guys, you're blinding them with their nuclear response. You're only going to make them put their finger on the twitchy on the trigger. It's just, we do not have competent people right now making decisions, and it is absolutely horrifying. So if we don't de-escalate quickly and just come to the table and settle this thing, we might eventually be in a draft. And if that happens, it's not going to be like Vietnam, where half the country's like, yes, sir, here we go. And one half of the country is, hell no, we won't go. It's going to be liberals and conservatives. Hell no, we won't go. We're not going to serve, elites that don't send their own children. Send your own freaking children, right? Like, we just spent 20 years fighting wars that were completely undone by the most incompetent withdrawal of in Afghanistan I've ever seen. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I've talked about this before. We are in the fourth turning, and this is the Strauss and Howe conceit that we are in an era of crisis. And in that era of crisis, the existing existing systems are going to be undone. Now, what that means, I don't know, but this is a natural cycle in history. And the last cycle we had was World War II. So but the people in charge 5 years from now aren't going to be the same people in charge. That I'm pretty sure of. And if they are, then we're going to have problems. And I'm not saying, it could just be through natural democratic processes, etc. But anyway, let's go back to these. See what folks are saying. Yeah, that happened a few weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to check it. You're going to have to look for it. Like, you have to have your antennae up for these sorts of things, because we are definitely in some sort of like a really weird Orwellian media blackout. Like, we are not seeing the reality of what's going on. We're seeing shades of it. And there's the thing that they forced everyone to take in 2021. The data is looking pretty bad, and that's all I'm going to say. You can figure out what I'm saying, and I'm not going to say anything more. Like, if you just look at the raw data, it is horrifying. So it's hard. Like, you have to kind of use some of the main news sources. I also talk to people in the military from time to time. They'll highlight these things, and then you have to look for them. And they might be in some mainstream media sources, but they're always de-emphasized or minimized, and things like that. So, and then other places, you just have to watch people who are direct participants in history, right? Like, they're on the ground and they tell their perspective. Now, their perspective is also going to be distorted. But if you see the same thing in enough places, then it's probably true. But the things that they choose to emphasize are like bread and circus sort of things, right? So, yeah, it's hard to. As an example, we take the Supreme. Actually, this is a perfect example. Take the Supreme Court decision, which explicitly outlined what a president's, what they can be prosecuted for, what they can't be prosecuted for, etc. The only way to get the right answer on that is to just go to the Supreme Court website and read the opinion. Just go as much as you can, go to primary sources. And then that'll get you away from the, oh my God, Trump's going to be a king. And it's just like, well, if he's a king, then the current guy you have is, by implication, a king. So I don't hear you complaining about that. Which is it, right? So it's much more nuanced than that. And there's other things too. If they hadn't made that decision, like, Obama would have been in trouble, right, for droning Alawaki, right, the 16-year-old American who probably deserved to be droned, but he could be tried for that. And there are certain acts that a president executes in an official capacity that a normal person couldn't get away. Like, you can't drone people in civilian life. You just can't. It's not an official act. So, again, I don't want to get too deep into that, but you just have to read. The takeaway from that example is read the primary sources, so you don't go into a hyperbolic spiral from either side, because they're going to say some crazy stuff, right? Like the Chevron thing, for instance. Like, the right was like, oh, this is great, but it turns out the right was the one that like advocated for that back in the 80s, right? Because they wanted a stronger executive branch. So these things go back and forth, and it's all about, like I said, equilibrium, etc. And just try not to freak out, try not to get influenced by the mass psychosis, the mass psychosis media, basically. Anyway, that's a long answer to a brief question. So, going back to future episodes. So I talked a little bit about Avi Loeb. The next episode, I mean, there's like 4 of these things, man. Because this guy, I don't think it would be useful for me to post a 3-hour and 45-minute interview with Dr. Jack Sarfati, right? But if I break it up into, 3 1-hour interviews and 1 45-minute interview, that's more consumable, let's just say. But I had a really good interview with him. We covered, he's some anti-Bidenisms that he kind of rants on a little bit, but not much. It's actually better than usual. But we really went into his equations, and we actually, I had a surprisingly uh, collaborative discussion with him because I was just asking dumb questions. And it turns out some of those questions were not so dumb. And he got excited in the sense that not like angry excited, but at one point he told me, "You just had NHIs controlling your mind," and I kind of just laughed. And he said, "I'm only half joking." Because I was raising issues at the beginning, not issues, but questions at the beginning of the interview that he thought were irrelevant. And then an hour later, he'd be like, phonons. You said something about phonons, but that's tied to this and this. And he's like, I never thought of that. And like, so it is, I think, a really good discussion that we had. So anyway, I know he's a controversial figure, but it's a rite of passage. I think that every podcaster in this particular genre must do. I highly recommend it. And you got to hold your ground sometimes, right? He told me we had the worst tank in the world. And he's like, you know nothing, this and that. And I'm like, Jack, I was an armor officer. Like, and he's just like, oh. So, you just have to be able to hold your ground when necessary and also back off. On matters of physics, Jack's the boss. I'm not messing with him. On international affairs, there's going to be some give and take. So there's 4 of those things that I'm currently working on. So we'll see that. There's another interview I did of an experiencer, and then there's a follow-on interview. It turns out that this experiencer was connected to a major family that is linked to a major aerospace company. And over his lifetime, he's had some discussions about what those folks really know. And I promise you, there's some good stuff. Like we almost certainly had parts of craft and things like that. Almost certainly. And there's a whole separate line about the aerospace companies that chose to work with the Nazis from Operation Paperclip and those who refused to, right? Because a lot of those folks who ran the aerospace companies after the war were bombing Germans during the war and hated them. So, and those that were willing to work with the Nazis got better stuff, apparently. So there's a whole history that we are not being shown or that's being minimized and things like that. So independent of that, some figures that you should look into, a gentleman named General Hans Kammler. If you watched my episode with Dr. John Brandenburg on a history of anti-gravity, he covers that to some extent. Like, this was a brutal son of a what. And allegedly, and I haven't looked at this up independently, but he was in charge of the anti-gravity program. He had every scientist in that program write down everything that they knew in kind of several reports. He collected the reports and then executed them all so that he would have leverage with the occupation government from the United States and or Russia. And in history, he kind of disappeared, but there's probably a pretty good chance that for all those secrets, we may have taken him in. So there's a lot of dirty history and a lot of blood that we weren't told. It was not explicitly covered in our history that probably is in our history. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting things in those interviews. I also have an interview scheduled with another guy. I've had an interview with him before and he didn't show up. So I'm not going to mention who it is. I'm just going to pray that he shows up and it goes well. Also, Frank Milburn has arranged for him and I to get on a call or interview or live stream. We still have to figure it out with uh, Dr. Colonel Alexander. So, or Dr. Alexander, Colonel Alexander, everyone talks. So I think that would be, that could be a super interesting live stream interview. I still have to work out the details. I haven't done any of that yet. That's the other thing too. As soon as I am about to lose 80 hours a week of work time, of independent work time, let's call it, all this stuff starts kind of coming in. It's just the way reality works. I'm thankful for it, but I'm just trying to get it done as much as I can prior to that. Also, I did this remote viewing project with Daz Smith and about 5 separate remote viewers, and I provided Daz with the target. He provided the remote viewers with it, and they're hitting. They're definitely hitting. Now, I'm not going to say what it is. But it's in the vicinity of, and again, well, I don't want to say any more, but that's likely to be an episode followed by a live stream with the remote viewers. I think Daz is finishing up the the final retaskings. So let's see. Yeah, it feels like there's like a conspiracy behind all this that's focused on reducing the number of people in the world. And it doesn't feel like humans are not smart enough for conspiracies like that. They're just not, right? It's like organizing a herd of, it's like herding cats. So it feels like there's something behind that. It could be spiritual, angels versus demons. It could be NHIs, competing NHIs, fighting wars like we're fighting with the Russians using Ukrainian bodies. They could be using human bodies to fight their wars. I don't know, but it definitely feels weird. Like all the dominoes are falling at precisely the right time, and it's odd. It's very odd. Um, so in terms, yeah, I think you asked that already, Farah. I'm pretty sure I answered that. Maybe I jumped over a few things, but yeah, could be, could be loading Mick, could be. Do you have any specific conspiracy books that you would recommend that would show a conspiracy and then show how it unfolded over time? Actually, that's a great idea for like if Peter Levenda could write a book about that, that would be a fascinating book where there was, a bunch of conspiracies. And I mean, the most obvious one is in Nature magazine. There were a group of scientists who quickly figured out that the lab leak hypothesis was correct. And then they proceeded to write an academic paper, a peer-reviewed academic paper that suggested it came from a wet market. That literally happened. And that article was recently removed. So there are some conspiracies that are real. That one is. That's kind of the world we're living in right now. And I think, you know, anyway, I'm not gonna talk about that at all. Interesting. So you're saying have Ferrario, Cutchin, Mira, and Gillis on one episode and see what happens? Or I mean, it's more like a live stream, but yeah, huh? Rule by secrecy. Yeah, Jim Mars. It's a shame he's no longer with us. He's a smart dude. Yeah, if I mean, it would be a little bit like herding cats, a little bit, but Yeah, I would do a live. I would do a live version of that because it would be hellish to try to edit, afterward. So, what else? What else we got? Um, oh boy. Sorry, I'm just reading about a wild rumor. Yeah, I'm not gonna share that because it's not. I can't confirm it or anything. Yeah, yeah. So, what sorts of things do folks want to see? Man, like an hour passed just like that. Thank you for all the questions. You all made it like that hour passed like nothing. The weird thing about having a live stream on my channel is the more I prepare for it, the harder it is for me to think of things to talk. But if like today, I just like schedule the live stream at like 2 p.m., just kind of just get everything set and then just sit down and go, it's a lot easier. And I have no idea why. I need to just figure out, what I think it's just I tend to over prepare. And then when I over prepare, I feel like I need the crutch of that over preparation, and then once I get through that material, the crutch is gone, and then I kind of. But that's not the case when I just kind of do something that's extemporaneous like this. So I'm going to have to do that because I'm not going to have as much time, after starting next week. So that's that's what I'm going to have to figure, and then I have to figure out how I have enough episodes or at least material to finish July. So I have to figure out if I just want to do one episode a week plus my radio show. My radio show is going to continue. So because it's on a Sunday night and I can maintain that without hopefully without interrupting work stuff. Also, the first 3 months of work, like it might be a little bit slow on the channel the first, but again, like things started ramping up again yesterday. I think I got 84 subscribers. I haven't had something like that like in one day. I haven't done that in months or had a day like that in months. So, and again, I'm trying to just get to that 10,000 and it was like asymptotic. Like the closer I got to it, the fewer subscribers I had in each given month. Like if I showed you a chart, it's just like subscribers and it just goes, just asymptotic, right? So in one day, I had like a third of the month of June, something like that. So a little bit less than, yeah, about a third of the month of June in one day in July. So the other thing too is that only happened because somebody shared something on Twitter. YouTube didn't do a damn thing. And then what happens is when all this external traffic hits YouTube, then YouTube follows, right? So then they start suggesting more when they see a big ramp. So if you just, if you listen to all these YouTube gurus, a lot of them say, don't send anything, just let the algorithm figure it out. No, absolutely not. Algorithm isn't going to do anything for you. You have to bring traffic to YouTube. And then YouTube will help you. They're not going to do a damn thing for you if you just hope and pray. Hope is not a method. So anyway, I'm not trying to rant. I'm glad happy to have the opportunity, but this is a hard thing to do, and you just have to keep persisting and persisting and persisting. Yeah, that's good to hear, Roger. I'm glad. Like I always appreciate like a counter data point because it helps validate whether or not what I'm saying is complete garbage or not. I'm not saying it's complete. I think there's some truth in what I'm saying, but I don't think it's entirely true. Right. I think if I were to take a more dispassionate view of it, it's that my channel is not focused enough. It's not only UFOs or not only remote viewing or not only demonic possession, right? It's kind of a broader panoply of all this phenomena. It's basically on the phenomena, right? As broadly as you can take it. But there's also some anti-gravity technology, stuff like that. So uh, that's, I think, what makes it harder for YouTube to find people for my channel. So it is, I mean, it's partly my fault. I could just pigeonhole myself into certain categories. So look, I look at other sites, and I'm not going to say any of them because I don't want to. But it infuriates me because I feel like there's a lower quality of work product, and they start their channels after me, and they surpass me much, and they surpass me in subscribers, and quality, according to my subjective standard, is crap, and the hosts aren't that bright. But you know what? It could just be that I'm kind of a little bit too. Maybe I'm over people's heads. Maybe, right? It could just be that there's a normal curve, and I'm like standard deviation above. Like my audience is a IQ a standard deviation above the mean, and that's a much smaller group. That's like 17% of the population, right? So, what do you do with that? Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's actually data that they show me with the new people. The thing that YouTube controls is this metric called impressions, and it's not like everything else is kind of like a Pareto, like it's like a power law, which it should be. That's kind of a natural thing, but impressions are not. They do not follow a Pareto law, which means they're by definition artificial. So I 100% agree, Lucid. And that's my philosophy. I'm not like integrity is pretty important to me. I'm not just gonna pigeonhole what could be a very wide ranging phenomena into like nuts and bolts or whatever. But there is a place for nuts and bolts in certain discussions, right? With Avi Loeb, that entire video is very data, like very much grounded in the data. But there's good questions. I use AI to, you know, introduce intriguing possibilities and all that stuff. And he, like, honestly, after the interview, he's like, "This is one of the best podcasting interviews I've ever had." And I said, "Because I'm prepared." He's like, "Yes, you were definitely prepared." And anyway, you'll see it. It is I really like the guy. After that experience, I really appreciate him. And he's been getting attacked. It's kind of messed up. And he hasn't said anything controversial. He's just kind of followed what is right in front of his nose, and he's hedged it very carefully in order to mitigate the risk to his reputation. Whereas I don't have to do that. I can just come out and say, "This looks like a spacecraft that's with some sort of nuclear, reactor of some sort, most likely fusion reactor." So it looks like, right? So yeah, yeah, but it's going to be harder because I'm not going to have a lot as much time. So we'll figure it out. Like if I did all my interviews live, I would cut down channel preparation time by 90%. Like the radio shows, I just go in pretty much cold and I just let it happen. And I seem to do as well as I do on recorded interviews. But the problem with recorded interviews is I go through and like edit the audio and like improve it and try to remove uhs and ums. I don't always. With the Sarfati interviews, like there's just he's writing equations and stuff like that. You have to kind of let him go, otherwise it'll be like it'll look jumpy and stuff like that. So yeah, it just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. But I love doing it too. It's like if I could make a a great living by doing this stuff, I would never go back, right? But I have a son. I don't know if I've probably told many of you, but he's he's going to Stanford next year, and I got to pay for it, right? And I've kind of had a treasure chest in savings and stuff like that. And I'm doing just fine now. But when something falls on your lap that is like a sizable annual income that could kind of build that war chest back up, because I had a bigger war chest 2.5 years ago than I do now, but it's still, it didn't drain as quickly as I thought it would, and I'm still doing just fine. But um, if there's a chance to replenish that, and guys, this thing fell in my lap. I wasn't submitting resumes. I wasn't doing any of that. And a former co-worker just said, "Hey, you want to talk about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, sure." And it seemed to have a really good culture, um, and then and it pays very well, and there's a very good future for the outcome of this particular company. So I'll figure it out. I always figure things out, right? I will figure things out. I just ask for some patience on your part. Don't abandon me. Don't, I'm going to keep chugging. Hopefully I don't let it destroy my health or anything like I need to get back into hiking and things like that. Cause I am like way out of shape and it worries me a little bit. So I need to get back into the problem is it's so hot right now that that's a little hard. Let's see. Yeah, they might, or they might be farming us. I don't know. It might not even be ET. Yeah, yeah, and that's the inflation stuff. I'm sorry to hear about your tile business, man. Yeah, it's hard to for people to do improvements in this economy. Like it's just it's rough. So like I have a ton of work that needs to be done in my house. The problem is until my kids get older, I don't want to do it because they'll just destroy it again. Right? We need new rugs. We need to have the house repainted inside. Like there's a ton of crap that needs to be done. But until my kids are old enough to, you know, I'll waste money by. I've also thought about becoming energy independent too, getting solar panels and some Tesla battery things and all that stuff. So I might do something like that sooner rather than later because energy, like we're starting to have um, rolling blackouts and stuff like that because California did not do a good job of building capacity on the grid. So yeah, it could be some sort of cleansing or something. I don't know. And again, we could just it could just be we're all living in a simulation and we all signed up for this exciting times that we can all go through. Which while we're here in meat suits, it's not all that fun. But we are more than the physical. Maybe we're learning the right lessons and things like that. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell folks, but I don't even know how I got on this topic. But like I said, I'm gonna have to adjust. Like I'm still doing some other stuff with the local university. I'm still doing that stuff, and it's like starting and like I really don't know how I'm gonna manage this. But that's what I like. That's what I've learned in my life. You just when you're when you have a lot to do, you just keep doing it. You just keep pushing through. And I don't know how long that's gonna work, but if like this is something that I think if I just keep doing and do for like 5 years, I think I'll have a sizable audience. And I think I'll be able to open things up to many other possibilities. I just have to stay the course. In the interim, though, I'll also be able to save money for retire. And that's the other thing too. I was still able to save money for retirement. Always tried to max out my IRA, even as an independent business owner. Like I maxed it out for the 2 years that I was. I wouldn't say I'm not technically unemployed because I'm self-employed, but I didn't have like a corporate job for 2.5 years, right? I just left the system, so to speak. But I was still able to fully fund each year. This year, I still need to fund it. I just haven't had a chance. I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but you should always do that. No, I mean like, well, have I lost money on the YouTube side? Yeah, yeah, but the majority of that money is just equipment, right? Like the laptop that I'm using right now, right? So it has many other uses and things like that. It's just a business expense. So is the business like cumulative cash flow positive? YouTube's not, but I also did consulting, which is just pure cash, right? It's just my time. I also did working with this local university. That's also pure cash, and that subsidizes the expense that I put into this channel. However, I don't have to invest as much in this channel because I already made the investments. Right. So even like my earphones here, they were like the cushion was falling apart. So rather than buy new earphones, I just bought new inserts and, maybe like 20, $30, something like that for, because everything else works, right? This is like a $250 headset that I didn't have to replace. I just, just did what I needed to do, found a better solution. So, yeah, and I didn't lose that. Most people take vacations, over a 2-year period that would cost more than I invested in the channel. So, but I really do enjoy it. I really do. And I like running the business aspect of it. Like I built this thing from nothing. I built my consulting business from nothing. I built, I was able to do okay on my own. No job, right? No like 9 to 5 job. Now, I was working 7 days a week, 12 to 18 hours a day, but it didn't feel that way. I got to see my son every day, right? He could just walk into my office you know, and interrupt me and all that stuff, which can be annoying at times, but I don't have the same relationship with my other 3 kids that I do with my son because he was the youngest and I was home and it was post COVID. And even the new role I have, it's 100% remote. It is a dream job. It is amazing. I just have to get my mindset back into working with other people because people can throw you off balance, right? I like to like produce and be productive and like get the stuff off my plate. And when people are constantly throwing stuff off your plate, interrupting it, like I'm going to have to be more patient and I'm going to have to kind of get over that because I'm going to be really frustrated by it. And it just is what it is. Oh, I didn't even say this. So when I was in Tennessee for LibertyCon, I sat down with my publisher and we went through for 2 hours on my manuscript. The good news is we spent 2 hours on my manuscript. The bad news is I got to rewrite about half of it. Like about half of it is, in other words, it's like start in the middle and then write another new half. And you can use the old stuff if the first book does well. So the good news is my publisher's investing time with me. The bad news is I got to find time to rewrite that novel. So that is it is a wonderful problem to have. Truly, it is a wonderful problem to have. I just have a lot of stuff on my plate right now that a lot of opportunities that I want to make sure that I take full advantage of. And I'm losing time. There's going to be a significantly greater demand on my time. However, I will also have people working for me. So usually in the first 3 months of any new role, it's very hands-on for me, like extremely hands-on, because I need to understand how everything works and I need to set up a new system. But once I set up a new system, then I delegate everything. And so typically in the longest tenure job I've had in recent years, the first 3 months were 18-hour days. Just 3 months, 18 hours, 18 hours, 18 hours, on average, right? Not necessarily working on weekends, but that's basically how it, um, during the week. So you're talking 80 to 100-hour weeks, right? After the first 3 months, and once you start hiring people and building up your team and setting everything up, I think by the end of my, you know, after 2 years, honestly, if you kind of are efficient enough, you're working 10 hours a week, honestly. But you're the one who has to set up the system. You're the one who has to kind of arrange things like that. And literally like high productivity work, high quality, and knowing, like, having all your fingers on the facts and kind of having the right answer at all times and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm the same way. I get really frustrated. Um, but I worked for other people for 25 years of my life. And then only in the last 2 years, I'm like, oh my God, this is like, I'm so much happier. Like, these are probably the happiest 2 years of my life, honestly, because I had control to some extent. Now, in terms of like income and stuff like that, I would say the first year was probably the second lowest income year I've had in my entire, since working. The second year, though, once you start to ramp, it wasn't what I was making as a CFO. It was a fraction of that, but it was still, somewhat competitive with some of the other jobs I had in the past. A little bit on the lower end, but again, I had flexibility. The other thing too is things like this snowball, right? So if you put investment in earlier on, it grows a lot faster at a higher scale to a certain point, and in which case, everything's an S curve, right? So it just slowly, then it ramps up, then like a sigmoid, and then starts to flatten out again, like an asymptotic curve. So and I think we're at the very bottom of where it's just starting to ramp into that middle of the S, like just starting. So, and I think that's what you see. You'll see channels like the Y Files who are just like slowly takes 2 years to get to 15,000 people, and then all of a sudden he's at a million, right? That's kind of what a sigmoid curve tends to look like. Oh, I appreciate that, Roger. Thank you. Yeah, for folks who are wondering what my books are, I've edited three. There's Weird World War III, which is about fictional short stories if the U.S. ever got into war with Russia. And by the way, that was published in 2020, just so you know. Okay, well before the current unpleasantness. Then there's Weird World War IV, and then Weird World War China. And if you watch any of my episodes now, you've seen that commercial so much that you probably automatically skip it, and I understand. Yeah, it's hard. I self-published my own anthology of my own short stories, 10 of my own short stories. And over the years, I've probably sold a little bit over 100 copies, something like that. That's still good. That's still decent. I mean, it's not crazy money, but the fact that you created something out of nothing and people purchased it is a reward in and of itself. See, that's the beauty of creation, right? you build something that didn't exist before, and then nurture it and help it grow. And sometimes it takes a life of its own, and it's really rewarding. Like, doing this channel has been extremely rewarding, right? Like the logo and the background and the color scheme and all that stuff. It's just all sort of organic. And you know, I don't know. I mean, people probably, probably think that's not that good, but whatever. But like, I really like that. Is like, I really like how it's all come together and how it all evolves. Demon Bane's Folly, very nice, by Roger E. Claiborne. All right, I'm guessing it's on Amazon, so folks should definitely check that out. I mean, seriously, like, reward people who create and punish people who destroy, because that's kind of where we are right now, right? Just leverage that creative instinct to make yourself happy and to help others, because that's kind of all we can do. Like, we live on a dark planet, folks, where the people in charge are constantly lying to us. We're seeing only shades of reality, and we all know that intuitively. I just wish, there will be the revelation of a new knowledge, as Chris Bledsoe has said in 2026. I just think the folks who run things owe us a little bit more of a more truth about the fundamental nature of reality. All right. So I don't know why. I'm surprised you're all still listening, because I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, I don't know. Just hang in there in terms of we got, like, for the Americans listening. Well, I mean, for most of the world, there's 4.3 billion people who are going to go through elections this year globally. Okay. So most of the human population is going through some form of an election cycle. So you're all part of it. Although I think the Ukrainians had their elections canceled. Hopefully that's not a dry run for here, but yeah, they probably do. I appreciate that, Mike Wick, 77. Uh, I really appreciate that. What software did you focus on learning? So, a few things. So I use Camtasia. Right now it's 2024. I initially used, I think, Movie Maker by Apple. Like, that was a good, just getting used to editing thing. But over time, once you become more serious, it makes sense to get something like Camtasia. I also get how to use Audiate, which helps me edit the audio outputs and syncs, right? So if I cut, I can edit like a script based on the recorded audio. It also shows waveforms. So if the script's slightly off, you can make sure you don't snip the wrong part of the script so it doesn't sound weird and all that stuff. But what Audiate does is, once you edit that, then it automatically lines it up with the video. It's a great product. It was kind of unstable for the first, like, year and first 2 years basically, or first year and a half, but it's gotten a lot better, knock on wood. It's gotten a lot more stable recently, so I really like it. I definitely like it, but you just make sure you kind of look into it. The second thing I do for B-roll, and B-roll are just like generic videos that you can upload. Like, when you see, in many cases, when you see like planets and like space and all that stuff in some of my videos, it comes from this company that supplies B-roll, which is, I use Storyblocks for that, but there are a bunch of other places. And again, it's like a subscription service that you can use. I also use it for some of the music, like all the music that you hear aside from the intro, which is by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. He just allows people to use that stuff for free, except there are people who claim his stuff, and it can be a problem. Actually, I had a video where I had to remove some of his music, even though it wasn't him claiming. There's a whole process, but Storyblocks also gives you music. So the music that I play aside from the intro on these live streams all comes from Storyblocks. Other stuff that I use, ChatGPT. I recently purchased a $20 a month subscription for that, and I use that to generate a lot of the pictures that you've seen recently, like the comic strip sort of like quality stuff. Also some of the whatchamacallit, some of the image, most of the images now on the thumbnails that you see, I'm also using AI to generate, because you can get very specific stuff. And, the AI is, it kind of has, it kind of, it's not perfect yet. It just takes, you have to work with it. Like, I'll give you an example. So the Black Frogs title, where you have like this black frog coming out of this guy's mouth, it wouldn't let me do that, because it looked like it was a human going through pain, right? Like, there's some left wing, like, you can't show humans and experience, just stupid stuff like that. So you have to you have to figure out ways around that. So I had to tell ChatGPT, Dolly in this case, draw me a picture of a human realistic statue with a black frog coming out of its mouth. And of course, it's like, oh yeah, here you go. Right? Like, no problem. Right? So what you saw was the AI's interpretation of a flesh colored statue on that thing. So anyway, it's just, but I still highly recommend it. It really helps improve quality. I use Photopea also to do Adobe Photoshop like work, and it's entirely free. I use Canva to do things for my Spotify thumbnails. What else do I use? Again, that's also free. I use Background Remove. That's also free, just to take pictures of the host and take out their, the background, so I can do all that stuff in the thumbnail where I place them in front of the image. I'm trying to think what other. I think that's most of the software, and then of course I use Excel to manage my business and all that stuff. Yeah, that's about it when it comes to software. Let's see what else. Yeah. Yes, Dolly. It's part of ChatGPT, but it's like DALL-E. I've used Gemini a little bit too, but it doesn't like white people. Let's just say that. Like, it won't. Like, if you literally wanted it to draw like a German soldier in World War II, you would only have like Indian, black, and like Asian Nazis, basically, which is absurd. But that's kind of, yeah. It's just Google has an ideological disease, let's just say, that prevents it from accurately portraying reality when it comes to Gemini. But I've used Gemini in the past. If you do like things that don't involve people, it can be okay. It could be okay as well. So I've generated some thumbnails with it. You just can't have any people in those thumbnails. So I appreciate that, Gon. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of new people probably on this live stream, which probably just came out of the blue for you all. So I appreciate that you joined. I'm steadily clawing my way to 10,000. I know I'm gonna make it there, and I'm just trying to get a few bangers in before I have to, officially start the the day job. So it's a shame because if this thing had taken off a lot faster, I wouldn't, you know. But again, that's not how things work, right? You just have to. There's a lot of luck in what you do, and there's a lot of other things that can kind of happen, and that stuff just didn't happen fast enough. But again, I'm not giving up. It's just, it might be a little bit slower. The rate of growth will be a little bit slower as a result, and I realize that, that is, as they say, what it is. So, where were we? I kind of get to like a stopping point, and then all of a sudden I'm talking about something else, and then 20 minutes passes by. So I'm in like this break point right now where, and usually it starts with a question. Yeah. It's probably just going to be more of the same, like skinwalkers at the Pentagon sort of thing, but it might even be less than that because who knows what he can say. There might be a lot of stuff that he just can't talk about. Because what I personally believe, and this is just a belief, there's really no way for me to know that, but I think Lou is part of a faction that wants to have controlled disclosure, and they want to do it slowly, right? They don't want to, like, human mutilations and abductions. Those two particular things are kind of off limits for the group of folks that he's in. And make no mistake, there is a group, right? Who, they collaborate together and things like that. There are certain podcasts out there that seem to come out of nowhere, that may have guests that aren't very charismatic, but they get a lot more views and all that stuff. So there is some like modified astroturf stuff going on out there. And like, I suspect, but I'm not going to say. To me, it looks obvious, but I don't want to disparage anybody because I'm sure they're good people. They have a little bit more juice than I do because I'm literally kind of off on my own, and I'm a bit more of a maverick because there's nobody telling me what I can and cannot say, and I probably would not do well with that sort of arrangement. But I don't know. I'm sure there's people who have come to me who are participants in this process, and I just don't know it. But there's no way for me to know that. And I just try to play it straight. I just ask the questions I'm going to ask. I'm respectful. I don't censor my guests. I mean, other than like I'll edit, like if they say the same thing 6 times, I'll edit out the first 5 times. Right. Not in all cases, but just to improve the flow, and you guys don't have to wade through the same information 6 times. So, but the sense I have is the powers that be have shut disclosure down, or are attempting to very aggressively. And there are folks who are still fighting the good fight, but there are people like me who aren't in the loop. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're going to ask intelligent questions and share whatever we have, because that's just what people like me do. Integrity is important, and I call it like I see it, and I'm not going to shape my narrative to fit some head honcho's narrative. I just don't work that way. Um, so, but yeah, there's at least one that seems to me to be highly astroturfed. I even have a disparaging name for it, but those of you who know me privately know, and that's it. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. Because I'm not going to be, because I'm sure these are good people, right? They're good people. It's just, I get very frustrated when it's very clear that I put in a ton of detailed work and craft into the episodes I produce, and then I see another production that very clearly doesn't. I'm not saying I'm not very charismatic, but there are people who are less charismatic than me, and and they have a lot more viewers, right? So I see that, and I just get it. Just pisses me off. But it is what it is. That's how the world works, people. That's how the world works. You're better off having a pack of people helping spread your word and this and that, particularly if it's astroturfed, because they can call YouTube themselves and say, hey, just increase the dial on this one, get this one out, right? Like that stuff happens. It's obvious. But it is what it is. I'm just doing the best with what I got. Yeah, I had like a night vision one. I bought these cheap Chinese uh night vision device where I could record when I went to Catalina, and it was like $120. If you're going to invest in something like that, buy something A that's American, and B that is probably a lot more expensive and durable, because the thing, but when I got back, it had completely fallen apart. It was utter garbage. So I had to toss it. It was just crap. So just be careful with that. Yeah, that Mike, you're right. That's what's gonna. That's probably that's how stuff works, right? When I no longer have as much time to focus on the show, then it just takes. I mean, already with guests, like the Avi Loeb thing happened in the last week, right? Like I was on, traveling, and I, basically paid my son to get a bunch of guests, and I had to like just threw Avi Loeb's name on there, and he, like, my son sent him an email, he responded instantly. I mean, and not like his secretary, like Dr. Avi Loeb. So that's the interesting thing about this. Oh, I didn't, I, you gotta be, when you work with one of those guys or interview one of those guys, and I know because my thesis advisor, but I've said this before, but became Obama's Secretary of Defense. But before that, he was well known in defense circles. So whenever you talk to people at that level of experience, status, expertise, you have to you got to be on point. You can't go like discovery, questioning, stuff like that. Like you have to do your homework, and you have to move those things along and be sharp when you're dealing with people like that. Otherwise, they will eat you alive, right? So I'm not saying that Dr. Loeb would do that, but like this guy worked on the Strategic Defense Initiative, right? Like, like he's big time, and he's extremely humble. Like the guy's extremely humble, but there's no reason he should be, right? Longest tenure in Harvard's astronomy department, all that good stuff. But when you're working with people like that, you have to be at the top of your game. You can't you can't just kind of wander into those meetings. You got to be prepared. And I was prepared, man. I was prepared. So anyway, that's so the short answer is it would not have been appropriate for me to take him down that rabbit hole, right? I had to focus. That's more of a nuts and bolts interview. But if you watch the clip, I went someplace that no one has ever gone with him in a podcast interview, ever. And he appreciated it because he could not talk about this stuff on his own. But if somebody else says it for him, he has some plausible deniability, and I could tell he appreciated that. And you'll see, just watch his face when I start rattling off these elements and what their uses are and things like that. It was really satisfying. So anyway, my sense is he knows a lot more than he can say. He didn't say anything like that to me. He never meant, but he definitely knows a lot more than he can say. And it can be frustrating because he probably has some clearance at some level, and people are attacking him, and he probably knows that they're 100% with 100% certainty that they're wrong, but he can't leverage those arguments or employ those arguments to shut them down because those arguments are probably based on classified information. That's my read, right? That doesn't mean there's nothing he said or implied or did anything. It's just my read. I just look at his background. I look at the data that he's analyzed, and it's screaming. The data screams that it may have come from some form of intelligent design. And that's it. So anyway, yeah, so I did not ask him if any men in black approached him. But he did say he has a UAP detector that he's been working on, and they haven't detected anything yet. Now it's in Boston, either Boston or Cambridge. I can't remember which, but I mean, it's detected stuff, but it hasn't detected anything anomalous yet. Yeah, there's some elements that are the same, but there's a definite element. Don, if you just joined, if you go to Twitter and look at my Twitter account, you know what? I mean, you all probably have 6 minutes, so I'll just play it. Well, let's see. Just if I get at least three people to say that they would watch it, just let me know. Let me know in the comments, not the comments, but in the chat. And while you're doing that, I will pull it up. If you folks are interested in it, you don't have to go to Twitter. Where is this guy? Okay. Let me see if I can share this. Okay. All right. Two's probably fine. Let me see. So present. Share screen. There we go. Now let me just see what it looks like. All right, just let me clean this up a little bit. All right, and you all should be able to still hear me. I'm going to hit play and enjoy. Whoops. Yeah, and that's the wrong video. Hold on. Could you at least all hear that? Okay, you could hear that? Okay, so let me close that one up. And pick the correct video. There we go. Oh, you could not hear that. No audio. Let's see. All right, just bear with me. I'm gonna try something. All right. There's probably a better way to do this. It's just downloading right now. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to share a chart. All right. Can you all hear that? Could you all hear that? At least when I started? Okay. All right. Here we go. From your, can you see that?
Yes.
I think this chart is extraordinary. Okay. And there's several reasons for it. So you talked a lot about these novel elements. So this is, if I'm interpreting it correctly, this kind of line is what we would expect to see from naturally occurring crust or materials from our solar system in terms of the relative proportions of specific elements. Is that correct, or am I a little bit off?
Yeah, so the solar system, the entire solar system was made of materials that condensed to make the sun and the planets and everything else in the solar system. And that is signified by the number 1 on the vertical axis here. So when you collect materials that are the primitive materials that made the solar system, that's what you should find. Now, in principle, you can separate materials in some regions of the solar system. You can separate some elements from other elements. But if you look at the primordial, the primitive material that made the solar system, it's very often close to the value of 1. And just to give you an example, there was a mission called OSIRIS-REx that visited an asteroid that came close to Earth. The asteroid is called Bennu. It landed on it, collected materials, and brought them back to Earth. And just recently, a few months ago, the results from the analysis of that material was posted. And when you look at a similar plot, that team, and by the way, that mission cost a fair fraction of $1 billion. So our mission was almost 1,000 times less expensive. But when they did the analysis, they found values for all these elements that you see. You're looking in the horizontal axis at 66 elements from the periodic table, going from the left to the right. And so what they found are values that are hovering around the 1, the value of the primordial solar system. And they may go up and down by a factor of a few at most. But that shows you an example of an object that belongs to the solar system, where the primitive materials are what we expect them to be. And by the way, they're very similar. The value of 1 is very similar to what you find in the sun. So the sun is a good representation of the original material that made the solar system. And what we find is some elements that you can see in red that go way above this value of 1, up to values of hundreds to 1,000. And that's why we say that was never, this kind of abundance pattern of chemical elements was never reported in the scientific literature. We had to give it a name. And so we picked the elements that are the most unusual: beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium. You can see them at the left, the middle, and the right. And these are 3 elements, and we gave it the name Belau to this composition. And we found it repeated in about 10% of the molten droplets that we found in the explosion site of the meteor.
So I started looking up kind of some of the practical applications of some of these elements. And once you start going from left to right, I'm just going to give you a few examples, and then I just got lazy and fed it into ChatGPT and got some interesting results. Okay. So let's take lithium. So lithium deuteride is used as a fusion fuel. Okay. Beryllium, it's used in like a beryllium reflector in fusion or thermonuclear bomb design. I'm not saying that's what this is, but I'm just saying.
It's used to moderate the neutrons. In order to get a chain reaction, you need the neutrons to be not so fast as they are when they are born from the nuclear reaction. So usually beryllium is used to moderate them in nuclear reactors, for example. Yes.
Uranium and thorium, typically nuclear fuels. That's kind of one section of things that you find. The other section of applications, and again, I'm not implying that it's definitely an actual device made by humans or non-humans. It's definitely not made by humans, because I think you confirmed at the very beginning it's outside the solar system.
Right.
But the other things that you have are niobium, that's used to strengthen steel alloys on Earth. Zirconium, it's used in jet engines and space shuttle parts. Yttrium is used to increase strength of alloys. So you get this spacecraft sort of strengthening alloy sort of thing. Tungsten, it's used particularly in heating elements, to keep spacecraft cool. So what I did is I said, okay, it's, I'm getting everything I check has kind of fits into one of these two categories. There's some catch-all elements like neodymium, which is strong, high-powered magnets, etc. Barium also has a wide variety of uses. All right, can you see this? Can you see
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the query I put. So based on the elemental composition, high concentrations of the following elements, basically fed it in based on this chemical composition of an object that falls from space. What are the most common possibilities? Okay. So, and it's in the order of what they would be. Okay. So, spacecraft or satellite. So, it's obviously not a human satellite if, there's a very small percentage chance that Spacecom is not right, but I think it's probably 0.1%, something like that. So, you can read this. I'm not going to read it for the audience.
It's very, very interesting, of course. And I should emphasize that we wrote a 46-page long paper with a lot of details. And only in one sentence, I, in the conclusion section, mentioned that maybe it's of artificial origin. And I was immediately attacked by both critics and journalists who said, how dare you put such a sentence and speculate. And I found that really strange that, I did not say explicitly that it's artificial. I just said that it's a possibility and we should keep it on the table until we find more evidence. And that resembles the experience I had with Oumuamua.
All right. So hopefully you all can hear me right now. All right. Sorry. I'm just being obsessive compulsive. I have to have this thing up the top. Otherwise, things are not perfect. I know things are not perfect anyway, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. All right. So yeah. So again, right in front of our noses, this was published, but he cannot say too much out loud. Otherwise, academia will eat him alive. And not fairly. Like they should be asking these questions as well. So yes, so on this in particular, he got the coordinates of like within a 7-mile radius of where the meteorite impacted from Space Command. So from like US satellites tracking the object and the debris and all that stuff. And I think within 99.999% confidence. So again, it was confirmed by the U.S. Defense Department. So like, there may be some stuff in there that was mixed from other things, but you're not going to see 1,000 times the amount of uranium on the sea surface unless something from an outside source, and clearly no one dumped a nuclear reactor there. But so whatever it was definitely came from debris from this meteorite that hit. Yeah, I mean that's I showed you the money shot. That's the best part. Now I did also ask him about novel isotopic ratios for specific elements, which is the other part of the story. And where that could be going is whenever UAPs materials slough off alleged UAPs, they typically have novel isotopic ratios with extreme purities of really weird isotopes of particular materials. Like if you talk about the Ubatuba incident in Brazil, there's like this really odd ratio of magnesium isotopes. But the question is from a material science perspective, does messing with the isotope of a particular material, like the isotopic ratios, in some sense create an emergent property of that material? And what I mean by emergent property is if you have hydrogen and you have oxygen, by themselves, neither is wet, right? Has the a property of wetness. If you combine the two, it there's an emergent property that comes out of that combination of wetness because you have water. So there might be something like that tied to anti-gravity or gravity modification that is related to that. And I think when I was talking to Sarfati, there was something to like phonons or lightning material. Anyway, it's I have to review the episode and all that stuff. But there are other places we went. I also asked him in one instance about the national security implication of one project that he's working on, and then we went into a little bit of about Oumuamua. But there's some other gems in there, but that's the biggest aha moment of the whole thing. Just so that you know. Yeah, maybe, but there could also be different factions, right? Who knows? Who knows? So, anyway, we kind of covered a lot of stuff I didn't expect to cover. So, is there anything else that people want to talk about, or I'll give folks about 7 more minutes if they have questions. Otherwise, enjoy your 4th of July. Don't get, take care of yourselves. Don't get too hot. Like on camera, explain what you saw and where you saw it roughly without revealing your exact location. Like what part of the world, in what conditions, etc. Yeah, I think platinum and gold are like there's like a common composition that you would expect to find in our solar system, and platinum and gold would be in there. Just um, like if you had plotted them on that chart, they would show up in whatever a 1 is, right, according to that ratio. But I don't think they showed up in it to any appreciable sense in his sample. Huh. How close is that to Gulf Breeze, Middleburg, Florida? So I just kind of liked Through a Glass Darkly. Like I used it in promoting my first anthology. So I used it, and then it turned out that it inadvertently described exactly what this channel is, right? Like we see, because it comes from one of the from the Bible, from Corinthians, and there's something to the effect of I'm not quoting biblical scripture because I'd murder it, but it says something to the effect of we see reality through a glass darkly, right? So there's a filter through which we're seeing reality. So it fits. It definitely fits. Anyway, that's a weird origin story, but that's kind of what it is. Huh. Yeah, particularly in Paris. Paris has all those catacombs. All right, cool. 64 miles to the west. Okay. How close is it to Eglin Air Force Base? Or Pensacola, actually, because Pensacola has a nuclear power school there. It's where I think a lot of the Navy nuke folks learn how to work on nuclear reactors and stuff like that. Is it close to any of those two places? Ah, so it's close to England Air Force Base. Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And you got it on camera? Yeah, you said you had it on camera. So, and then can you just paste the address of your YouTube channel in the comments, or not the comments, but the in the chat, so that folks can find it pretty quickly, and then just go to your community section, because I can find your channel, but I don't think anybody else. You don't want you want to make it as easy as possible for folks to find it. Is all I'm trying to say. Any other guests that folks want to see? Okay. Yeah, comments. Yeah, because it might not let you. It might give you a hard time, or YouTube might give you a hard time in terms of putting it in the chat. I mean, you should, if you can do both, do both. Because if folks see it in the chat, they can go right to it. I mean, I had like an ambiguous. I caught an ambiguous picture too. I think I showed it in the last live stream when I was in Catalina. It looks like a bell in the sky, but for all I know, it could just be a lens flare or something. But it was on the kind of middle of Catalina Island on the eastern side over the ocean between uh, Los Angeles and Catalina Island. Yeah, yeah. Please, if you can, Woo Riders DJ, put it in the chat as well. Just do both, so folks can find it. Again, the easier you make it on people, the more people will come to your site to check it out. Which I, highly recommend that you do it, because I think it is something that would be interesting to folks. All right, what else? We got about 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes before we move on. Oh, I see. No, I'm just talking about the link. I'm just talking about the link to your channel. Huh, Eddie Lenahan. I will check. I'll have to check him out. What do you mean match colors of elements, or match colors of lights to elements used? I mean, yeah, I mean, you should be able to. There's probably some spectral signature on some of the stuff. Oh, that's annoying. All right, yeah, just put it in the comments. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too. Like, as it's coming toward you, if you're assuming it's anti-gravity, it should trying to think. Yeah, there should be like a red shift. It should move toward the infrared. And then if it's moving away from you, there should be a blue shift, right? It but then it moves into ultraviolet, and then you wouldn't see it. So, but again, that's if there's like a gravity modification element. Maybe, I don't know. I'm probably oversimplifying it. All right. Well, everyone, as always, it was an absolute pleasure. I will see you this weekend on Through a Glass Darkly Radio. Mike Clellan is supposed to be on, but sometimes the stuff I send him goes to the spam folder, so I just need to make sure I reach out to him. And that's it. Y'all have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. If you're American, enjoy your freedom. If you're French, I think July 12th is your Freedom Day, or Bastille Day, or whatever you want to call it. And have a great night, y'all.
Breaking news.